Okay, my friends, so welcome to my quick tutorial about how to get started using Gimp, otherwise known as GNU image manipulation program. So first you're just going to go to Google, of course, and you're just going to type in Gimp, and it should bring you right here, and you'll pick the first one right up there, and it'll bring you to the main page for Gimp, or GNU image manipulation program, and just click on the download. Now obviously if you're using a Windows, you want to be downloading for Windows and for Mac, but it should detect that automatically. So if I go over here, you got a couple different options. I'll just pick directly just because I've got a fast internet speed, and it'll download right there. And once we have that all downloaded, then just run the setup wizard, and that should get you started. So yeah, that's kind of the first step. It's downloading there. We'll be back in a minute. So once you've downloaded Gimp and you've got it up and running for the first time, what you will see is this is the Gimp interface here. It's got four major areas, so four major places that you will be organizing your time. So over here on the left hand side, up here at the top, are all the different tools that you will be using to create your images and your shapes, and you got pencil tools and pen tools and text tools and warp tools and all these different tools, and you can spend hours and hours and hours getting to know all of these different tools. And then underneath that tool, when you select one of those tools, you'll see the specific settings for that specific tool appear down here. So if we go into rectangle, it'll say sort of what the feathering the edges, rounded corners. If you go down to pencil tool, it'll say the size of it and the aspect ratio and the angle and the spacing. And if you go to text, it'll show you what kind of font that you'll be using and how large the size of that font is. So it changes based on the tool that you are selecting. It also shows you what colors you're going to be using. So your foreground is up at the top and your background, but we'll get to all of that in a little bit. So those are your tools on your left hand side. In the middle, you will see your workspace. This is where the actual composition or image that you're working with will appear, is here in the middle. And over here on the right, we've got some brushes, some brush libraries, your pattern libraries, your font libraries will all be here on the right hand side. And then below that, you'll see your layers panel. So this is where all the different layers that you'll be using will appear. The one that's the topmost will be at the top, and then everything going back into the background, it goes down from there. So it's almost like, think of this as the top of, the top of your composition, the very surface of it, and then you go down in layers until you get to the very bottom of your composition. Anyway, so you've got your tools, you've got your workspace, you've got your libraries, you've got your layer panel down here, and then if you go up here, there along the top, there are all the different menus that you can find up here at the top. So for now, let's open up a new composition. So again, if we go to File, we click on New. There's also some shortcuts that you can learn, and what you'll see is it'll actually be by default a 1920 by 1080 composition. So it'll look a lot like, when you first open it up, you'll see it looks a lot like this. It'll be 1920 by 1080. Now you're working with a document. It says in your project description that you need to be working in an 8.5 by 11 in portrait and work with images at 300 dpi. So what does all that stuff mean? It basically means that you need to have, it needs to be 8.5 inches across and 11 inches down. So the width has to be 8.5 inches and the depth, or the height, has to be 11 inches. It has to be in portrait, so it has to be in up and down, like normal looking sort of Word document size. And then you want to make sure you have 300 dots per inch. So how do we do all that stuff? Well, you can do it a lot of different ways. You can manually stick in 8.5 by 11, and you can do that by clicking on the pixels, do the inches, and then you can put in, 8.5, and then put 11 here, and that's one way that you could get around that. Or you can go up to templates and you click on that, and you're just going to pick a standard letter size. So that's what 8.5 by 11 is. It's a letter size, and look at that, it says 300 ppi. You stick that on there, and that should be good. There also are advanced options. You can go in here and it says what do you want your resolutions to be, and it says pixels per millimeter, all these different things, RGB color, 8-bit, all this stuff you don't really need to worry about, as long as you make sure that your PPI, pixels per inch, are set to 300, you should be good to go. And also make sure that it is in portrait mode rather than landscape mode, because that would make it the wrong size because it's flipping it, right? So what this means is there's 8.5 inches across and 11 inches down, and it says here 300 PPI, RGB color. That's meaning it's representing color in a red channel, a green channel, and a blue color, but we'll get to that a little bit. So looks pretty good. We'll click on OK, and it should open up a brand new image for you, and it automatically, if you look down here, creates a new layer. So this is where all your new layers will be, where you will create new layers down here to stack things on top of each other. So now we're at this point where we have our document all set up kind of the way we want it to be. Now we need to start thinking about actually putting something onto the page, and we will do that in the next little section. Cool, so now you have your document all set up in the middle here. And what I often like to do is go up to View and make sure the zoom, you can do Fit Image in Window. I often like that, it kind of gives you a full view. But let's start off by creating a shape. Now what you can see is that by default, the program has already created a layer, which is your background layer, which is the white background here. Now if you wanted your background to be a different color, then you would have to draw out a shape to make the background a different color. So why don't I'll teach you how to make a shape really quick. So what I do is, especially in Gimp, you need to make a new layer for every object that you are adding in, every piece that you're adding in. So I like to create a new layer, and what that'll do is ask you kind of what kind of layer do you want it to be, full size or whatever. I just click OK, and it creates a new layer. Now you can't see it because we haven't put anything onto the layer yet, but you can see that it has this little crosswork pattern here. That means that it's transparent, which is what we want. So let's say we wanted to create a rectangle. So let's go up here to the tool panel, and I will take my cursor, I now have it selected, and I will drag out a square. Now unlike Photoshop, there's you can't just create the rectangle just by letting go and then it'll just fill it in based on the foreground color over here. No, what you have to do is you actually have to tell Gimp that you want to fill it with something. So what I do is I go in here and I right click, and it'll bring up this menu right here. So what I want to do is go to Edit, and you'll see down here it will give me a bunch of different options. So it'll say fill with FG color, foreground color, or fill with background color. So right now I have my foreground color set as a blue, so I can click on that and it will fill it with blue. Fantastic, you have got a brand new blue square. So let's say we wanted to make a circle. It's sort of the same process. You can go up to Circle, the ellipse creation tool, and you can drag out a circle, let go, and then let's say I didn't want the foreground color or the color of the circle to be blue, but I wanted it to be red. Well, then you're going to have to change the color over here, the foreground color, to be a different color. So if we click on that, then it'll bring up this sort of color picker, and there's a lot of different ways for you to change the color that you want to have. So we want ours to maybe be red. So if you want it to be red, then you just there's this little color shifter thing here for the whole rainbow looking thing. You want to pull it up to red and then go up into the farther to the right, top right that you go, the more R it will be. So you see you have RGB, so the R stands for red, the G stands for green, and the last one stands for blue. And the more you pull it to the top, it will make it more red, less red. You can see here as I shift this little crosshairs around, it will change sort of what the color is. So I want it to be, let's just make it pure red for now. So that's R100 G0 B0. Click on OK. So that doesn't change the color of this, it's only changed the color of the foreground color. So I go in here, click on right click, or if you want to, if you don't have the right click, say you're on the Mac and you don't want to have to click the button or anything, you go up to edit, and the same things will appear in the edit menu, filled with foreground color. So let's just do that, fill with foreground color. It makes it red. So there you go. Now you want to make sure, especially in Gimp, it's a bit different than Photoshop, where I can't just take this and sort of shift it around and change it after the fact. I want to make sure that I sort of have the shape that I want before I fill it in with a bunch of with a bunch of color. But let's say I didn't want the color to be on the inside, but I wanted it to be the stroke or the border of it. So let's say I wanted to create another circle, and I wanted it to be, but while we're creating that, why don't we make it so that it's a perfectly round circle? And the way you can do that is by hitting Shift, and now when you move it up and down, it stays perfectly circular while you are doing it. So again, if you press Shift, then it will make it so that it's perfectly even, both in the width and in the height. So I'll just let that go. But now I just want the border of the circle to be a color. What you can do is you can go in here, right click again, go to edit, and you can go down to what's called stroke selection. So what's around the edge is called the stroke. So if I click on the stroke, it'll bring up this panel right here. And what that says is you can do stroke line, solid color, and you can just pick what you want the stroke to be. But what I find is often better is to pick stroke with a paint tool. What that does is link the stroke to either your paintbrush or your pencil or your eraser. And let's go with paintbrush. And so what that means is if you go over to paintbrush, then the paintbrush has a bunch of different options over here. So it's linked to the paintbrush settings. And you can very easily shift that to be either bigger or smaller. So let's pick 10. Why not 10? And we'll click on stroke, and that will create a red stroke all the way around. Now you can make that stroke bigger or smaller. So if I just press Control Z, which is undo, or you go up to edit and click undo, we can do that again. So let's say maybe I wanted the stroke to be a bit bigger. I'll make it, why not 40? Then I go over here and I'll go back up to edit, go to stroke selection. It's linked to the paintbrush tool. I click stroke, and now it's really, really big. And actually, if we zoom in, you can see that it sort of has a feather on it here, sort of, a little bit less, and then it kind of comes in and then goes away again. So that's like the hardness of it, of the brush. So you can change a lot of different things on that. Let's say we wanted it to be really not kind of blurred out towards the edges of this. Let's make a square this time. So again, we click, drag it out. I want to make it perfectly square, so I'll use Shift, and we'll go like that. Now we want to make the stroke, let's say blue. So again, we want to go over here. Let's make it green, because we haven't used green yet. So we'll go to green. I'll just pick a random green, pick OK. And now I want to go to the pencil tool. Now the pencil tool has a bit more of a fine edge, so let's make the pencil tool, maybe we want it to be decently thick, so let's make it 50. So again, we're in the pencil tool right now. Now you go back over here, you click, right click, go to edit, go to stroke selection, and now we want to link it not to the paintbrush tool but to the pencil tool, and then we'll click stroke, and there you go. You've got a very, very even line there all the way around for your border. Now up to this point, we've been creating all of our different shapes on the same layer, which is layer. Now why do you want to do this? Now let's say you're creating a composition and you want to have things stacked on top of other things. Well, you can do that all within the same layer, but the problem with that is, what if you wanted to move around one of these shapes after the fact? So there's really no way to do that. I can go up to Move Tool, I can click on the circle, but it moves everything on the exact same layer. And that's not ideal, especially when you're trying to make a composition with a whole bunch of different layers on it. So let's say I wanted to have I want to be able to move my shapes around, because just by default you want to move things around, especially when you're creating a book cover. It's nice to have different layers going on, things on top of other things. So let's make a new layer, and it's going to pull this up here. So that's down here underneath the layer panel. Let's create a new layer, and we'll just call it, I don't know, you can call it whatever you want. Say you want to rename your layers to indicate what is on the layer. So let's say I'll go circle, green circle. So I'll just put green circle here. Okay, I'll create a new layer on top of that. Now what I like to do is, often when I'm done with the layer underneath, you can lock the layer. You can turn them off. You can also lock them. So that means that you can't alter anything in that actual layer. And yeah, so just lock that to make sure you're not affecting anything in the layer. Now if I use the move tool on this layer, oh wait, it's moving around. Why is it doing that? Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. But I want to put things on top of this layer on the new layer, because I want to, let's say, a green circle to be on top of this red circle here. So let's go back up here, we'll select this, and good, it's already a green circle has been selected. I'll click there, and I'm holding down Shift to make sure that it is even. I'll hold it down like that. Now remember, to fill it, you right click on there, and you go to Edit, and you go Filled with Foreground Color. Now you could have two different colors selected here. So you could have green on the top, and then you could maybe pick, let's say for the background color, I want a blue, right? Now you've got green, two different options to choose from. You go back to Edit, and you've got Fill with Foreground Color, which is green, and you've got a background color, which is blue. So let's pick the blue, let's pick the green one, foreground color. And now what you've got is you've got a different layer going on top of there. Now you can see what actually happened there is that I had two different sort of selections going on at the same time, and we don't want that. So let's click away to make sure that there's no selections going on. I'll reselect the circle tool. So you could have multiple circles going on. So I could have, you know, one circle here. I want to put another circle up here. But you can see that this circle, as well as this circle, whatever is selected here is the thing that you're actually going to fill with the color. So if we right click again, Edit, Filled with Foreground Color, and now I've got a green circle on top of that circle. Now why is it important that I put it on two different layers? Because now it means that I can actually move around the green circle independent of the red circle. So if I do this, I can actually do, there's two different things for the move tool. I can have pick a layer or guide, or move the active layer. So right now I have, you can kind of switch between these two. Move the active layer is if I'm on the green circle layer, it will only move, you see, the green circle, right? Like that. So let's say I wanted to put it up here, I could leave it there. If I want to move it down here, I could do that. However, it only moves the layer that is selected over here in this panel right here. But let's say I just wanted to kind of quickly get to the other layer. Well, you could do pick a layer or guide, and what it'll do is it'll pick, let's say if I were to pick, I want to move whatever layer this rectangle is on. Well, I can click on the rectangle, and now, oh, it's not that there's only a rectangle, and it's going to move everything on the layer with the rectangle. So there's kind of like two different options. You can pick that one, and you can move around everything on the green circle layer, and then you can quickly move over here, and you could pick, it kind of scans through the document and sees, oh, what's the one thing that I need to select, and it'll pick that one. So that's kind of how to make how to use layers in a very, very effective way. Okay, so we've covered how to create things using the rectangle and the circle tool. We've also taught you how to make layers over here on the right hand side, which will help you to manipulate things and keep things independent of other things. And we've also taught you how to fill things using the stroke right here, the stroke selection, or fill with the foreground and background colors. In the next tutorial, we're going to teach you how to add text in there, and also how to cut out some objects. So we will be right back with that in a minute. Alright, so you can see my beautiful composition is coming along fantastically. So just a couple things really quick. What if you want to erase something out of the composition? Really easy to do. Go up here to the selection tool, and let's say I want to get rid of this red circle down here on the left hand side. I just have to draw that out there, and then just right click on that, go to edit, and then go down to clear. Bam, gone. No more red circle. You can also do the same thing. Let's say I don't want this blue rectangle up at the top. No, you have to make sure that the layer that you're working on is the correct layer. So let's say I were to drag this out here, and then I were to right click on that, go to edit, and then I were to click clear. It's only going to erase the red circle because the green circle is on a different layer. But I'm going to bring back that beautiful red circle. And now you see if I were to click on the green circle and then I were to have the same selection going, edit, and then clear, now the green circle is gone. So you can see it's very, very important. This is actually great because it would mean, let's say you wanted to, this is why layers are great, because if you wanted to delete something, just the red circle underneath, you have to find out which layer it's on, and I often do that by turning the opacity of the layers on and off to find out which layer it is. Then I could just erase something out from underneath of it. So that's really great. Yeah, so why don't we get rid of this green. I don't feel like this green. You can also erase just part of a shape if you want to. So I could do that. You could use this kind of artistically. I go to edit and I go clear, and it's only erased half of the actual shape down there. So that's great. But I'm just going to get rid of all of it because I don't think it's really adding much to the overall composition here. So we'll go clear. There it is. Okay, so now why don't we talk about text, because text is kind of important. You're probably going to want to have the author's name and the title and, you know, some details about it depending on the book, like a tagline or something like that. So you want to add some text. So that's what this actual letter is for here. And you can see already there are some settings over here. Now there's different fonts. If you click on this button over here, you can see all of the different fonts here on the left hand side that you can pick from, and there are quite a few in there. There's also ways to download fonts inside here. I'm going to pick one of my favorite fonts, which is Rockwell font, and we'll do that. And you can pick the size of it, either through inches or pixels. I'd say stick with pixels. And you can pick the color of your text. So I'm going to pick the red here. Maybe I'll make it pink because pink is fun. Yeah, maybe purple. Okay, so I'll pick purple, make that okay. Then all I gotta do is go over here, click in here, and start typing out what I want to put. So let's say the book is called David's Amazing Book That You Definitely Want to Buy. Okay, it was exclamation mark because that adds some interest. So now if I do that, I've got this text right here, and you can see over here on the left hand side that it has created a separate text layer just for that, which is fantastic. You can change different things inside of here. If I wanted to highlight all the text and then I wanted to say bold it, or I wanted to italicize it, or I wanted to underline the text, then you can do that. There's also different things over here talking about, you know, if you want an indent for, you know, for the lettering. I'm just going to put that back to 0. If you want to have, let's say you had multiple lines. So let's say I were to go in here and I were to make another line of text saying, you should buy it right now, because you should if I had a book. Then if you go in here, what that'll do is space the different lines apart from each other right there. Otherwise Yeah, so right there. So you can separate how far apart the lines are, or you can also separate how far apart all the individual letters are, letter spacing. I wouldn't suggest doing that too much unless there was a real reason for doing that. So indentation, line spacing, letter spacing, all those different options for you. You can also go in here, highlight all the different letters, and you can make the font bigger or you can make the font smaller. And you can also go to the move tool and move that specific layer right around. Now also there is the justification. So you wanted it to be coming from the left hand side. That's the way it is by default. You can also have it coming from so you have to highlight all that, and then you could click come from the right side, centered, filled. So that takes, if you had an actual text box, it would make the lettering actually fit into that text box. I would say most of the time you're going to use left or maybe centered. Very few times you ever use right, and filled usually doesn't look very good unless it's in a larger paragraph or you're making a magazine, but we'll just go with that. There's also another way to do text. You can also make a box and then fill that box with the text. So let's say I wanted the text to be in this blue circle. I can drag a text box just inside of there, and then I can start. I probably don't want it to be pink. I mean, unless it's a really, no, there's really no reason you'd ever use that. So I just want it to be white. You can go in here, click on the color, drag it all the way over to the left hand side, click OK, and I want it to be white text, so I'll just type, "Hey there people, it is good to see you. I am just going to make stuff up here so that you can see how the text will fill this box automatically." And what it will do is it will just fill in that box exactly the way you see. You can even, let's say I can just copy this text, and no matter how many times I fill it, it will stick within the confines of that text box. And what's nice is that every single text box appears as a new layer, so that I can easily, this is another reason why you'd want to do it, is I can just delete that layer and then it just goes away but doesn't affect anything else. So that's basically how text works inside of the program, inside of Gimp here. Very, very basic. There's obviously lots more tutorials on YouTube about how to get more exact or how to import fonts and things like that, but that should get you started moving and playing with text. Awesome. And we're going to come back in a minute and teach you how to cut things out of photos. Coming at you in a minute. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different topics here. The last one I really want to touch on is how to actually cut out and manipulate your photos on a basic level. So let's bring in a photo that we want to edit. So I've gone ahead and downloaded a photo of former McMaster quarterback Kyle Quinlan, and we're going to bring that into Gimp and just drop it right in there. So you should see it there. Now you can start to manipulate it, move it around, move it to where you want it to be, but it's a bit small, so maybe I'd want to make it a little bit bigger. So you can use a lot of different tools to move the photo around. We got a couple here on the fourth row. First of all, you can use the rotate tool. So let's say you wanted to rotate this photo of Kyle around, you could do that. If you wanted to scale the photo up, then you can click on that scale tool, and what you'll see is a bunch of, if we zoom in a bit closer, a bunch of rectangles showing up around the photo, and you can use those to make the photo bigger that way, or you can make it taller that way. But I want it to scale proportionately, so I could go up here to the corner, move that up and down, but really what I want is, you don't really want to move the photo too far outside of its original aspect ratio, meaning the sort of relationship between the width and the height, because it just starts making him look weird and like stretched out and not quite natural, like a human shape. So what you can do to scale proportionally is, if you hold down the shift key like you did for the square and for the circle, it will scale it up proportionally. Again, that's the shift key to make it scale bigger and smaller, keeping the relationship between the width and the height the same. So if I just release that, I'll do a quick render, and there he is. If I click outside of this, looking good, Kyle. Okay, so now let's say I wanted to just focus on a specific part of Kyle. I wanted to crop the photo a little bit. Well, I can go over here to the crop tool and make sure that this little box here, the current layer only, is selected. Now when you pull pictures into Gimp, it will automatically make that picture into its own layer, which is really nice because you probably want to move that photo around and adjust it. And so you want to make sure that layer is selected and that you've selected this current layer only. Then what you do is you just drag a box out to where you want the photo to be. So let's say I just wanted Kyle's head and throwing arm. I would just do that, and then it would kind of blacken out the rest of the image. And then when you press to show what you want, you can adjust it a bit more if you want to. Then you can click enter, and it will crop that photo down to the size that you want it to be. So let's say we just wanted to, though, I'm just going to crop a little bit more and, you know, get just his throwing arm here. So I'll do that. Looks good to me. You're going to keep it really basic, and I'm going to scale it up a little bit. So we'll click on that photo. I'll just, you know, use the shift key to proportionally move it up and down. Let's say I just want to, now you don't want to make the image too big. This is a good example. You start seeing the pixelation and it starts getting blurred out. So you don't want to go too much bigger than the original photo. So probably, actually right about on the size it was the, you know, proper size for it to be. So now I just want to cut, let's say I don't want this blurry background to be in here. I just want to cut his arm out so that I could use it in a composition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the best way is I'm going to go to the path tool that's up here, this sort of weird line with the two dots on it and this sort of glue looking thing. And I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to basically draw a line using different points. So let's just start up here with the football. You can click, you make your first point, go to where you want your second point to be, click there, and then while you're still holding down the mouse, you can click and sort of drag, and that line will bend to where you want it to be. Then I'll make my next line, and in the same way I'll kind of drag it out, make sure it's all the way I want it to be, do the next one. And really, the more dots you have along the path, the more fine-tuned you can make this. It's better to have more dots, because those control points help you to really fine-tune your composition. Now I'm doing a really rough job here, and just for the sake of time, see, the more dots you make, the more fine adjustments you can make. And I'm just going to kind of go ahead and do some major lines here, but you could really spend your time really cutting out especially for any graphic you want to put into here, you'd probably want to make it pretty accurate. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that my line sort of intersects with the first line, so I'm going to click on that again, get it as close as I can, and then kind of drag that over so that the two are pretty much on top of each other like that. Now what I'm going to do is to cut it out, I'm going to right click, and it's going to bring up that menu, go down to select, and you're going to go select from path. Okay, so again, you have everything selected, you right click, select from path. Okay, now what that's done is it's created, this is the active thing that you're going to cut out. Now if I were to just press delete or cut, if you go into edit and cut, it's going to cut out that selection. Well, we don't want that, so if I press Control Z to go back, or undo, if you go to edit and then press undo, it'll bring it back. I want to get the stuff that's outside of the selection. So what you do is you go into right click, you go select, you press invert. Now if I press delete or I press edit, cut, it cuts out just the arm section of the photo that I wanted. And that's sort of, and now I can go in there and I can move that arm around and it should be pretty good. Now let's go back, Control Z, and remember when you're doing this you want to make sure that you've made all your lines, and then you right click, you press select, and then you press from path. So if we do this really quickly again, just in case you missed it, you make your the path tool, you make the line that you want it to be. The more dots you have, the more accurate you can be with it. You kind of click through this and you make sure that your last dot, you can click on each one of them and drag them. You can select any of the points that you made and sort of drag them out to be more what you want them to be. Once you've done that, you go right click, you go select from path, right? Then you go back again, you go select, and you go invert. Then and only then can you go edit to cut, and then you'll have the piece of the image that you want hanging out there. And now once you've done that, you can go in and you can move that around. You can rotate that whatever way you want. Yeah, it looks a bit weird. I don't know why it's doing that. Anyway, yeah, so you can do anything you want to do with it. You can scale it up and down. Oh, interesting. I've got like 2 selections going on here. So we'll just delete that because we don't need that, right? And yeah, and you can pretty much do everything you want with that image that you've cut out. And that's really the way to sort of cut out your images, manipulate them, and do all sorts of those wonderful things with it. So yeah, so you've learned about the interface, you've learned about how to make shapes, you've learned about text, you've learned about how to cut pieces of photos out. There are lots and lots of tutorials online that will help you to learn how to use Gimp. These are just some of the basics. We also want to show quickly, sort of for the last creation part of this, I want to show how to put a drop shadow onto text or onto actual shapes. So let's say I wanted to put a drop shadow onto this text down here. So I'm going to pick the text layer over here on the right hand side, and with that selected I'm going to go up to filters. So you got tools and filters here. Go over to light and shadow, and then there's one down here, and I think this should be good for pretty much all of your needs, is this thing called Drop Shadow Legacy. Click on that. Now what this is going to ask you is how far do you want it to be offset to on the x-axis. Okay, so how far it's going to be going this way and how far it's going to be down on the y-axis, and also blur. And you can also change the color of it and the opacity of it if you want to. You can always play around with these different settings. So if I'm just going to go with the default setting, and if I click, I'm going to zoom in a bit more. If I click OK, then it will put some drop shadow right there behind the text. Now I can press, if I go back up here, go back to filters, go to light and shadow, go to drop shadow. There's a drop shadow legacy and a new drop shadow. So I'm going to go reset. I'm going to go Control Z, and let's try it with the new one, drop shadow. So light and shadow, drop shadow. Yeah, but see, the great thing about this one is that you can actually change things in real time. So you can see that it's actually changing the drop shadow in real time. You can change the blur radius. See, if you want it to be a bit more sharp, you can do that. And if you want to change the color, you could make it like a red drop shadow if you wanted to. So all kinds of different types of options which could help things to pop off the page. Drop shadow is a bit, people don't usually use it a whole lot in graphic design anymore, but it is useful to set things against the background. So if I go up here, I'm going to pick, let's say I wanted to do it on this green circle right here. I wanted it to, for whatever reason, have a drop shadow. So we'll go up there, pick the green. This is why it's important to have things on different layers, because then you can manipulate them individually. So I've got the green circle selected, go to filters, go to light and shadow, pick and drop shadow, and you can see that already it's sort of being differentiated from the thing. So it makes things pop a bit more, gives the illusion of depth. So if I wanted to turn up the opacity, then you can see that it sort of gets harder and softer based on how far I've got that away. And you can also change the, got a lot of presets here, so that's what I used for the last thing there. I can offset it a bit more, do a whole bunch of, so just play around with these settings if you really feel like you want to use drop shadow for things. It can help in certain situations, give the illusion of depth and things popping off the page. Again, it's not used all that much, but in my experience for what I've done in all my graphic design projects, but it's definitely there in case you want to use it. So let's say that, you know, I mean, I know that my book cover is just absolutely gorgeous, and that, of course, you know, you're going to go out and buy my book right now. But I'm sure yours are going to look much better. But let's say I wanted to export this out as the finished product. So making sure that everything's kind of locked in place. Now everything inside of this white border is going to be rendered out into the final version of your book cover. So to export it, you're going to go up to File. You're going to go to Export As. And it's going to bring up this drop menu right here, and it gives you some different options here. It's by default going to save it as a PNG file, but in your assignment outline, it's for assignment number 3, it says that it wants it as a JPEG file. So what you can do is go down here, and it says select file type. It's not obvious that this is a drop down menu. I'm not a big fan of this, but you can again go down here to select file type, click on that, and it'll bring up a drop menu, and here's all the different extensions that are available to be exported into. Now here's JPEG. You can also do it as a PSD, a Photoshop image. You can do it as a PDF. You can do it as a TIFF file or as a bitmap file. But again, the project specifically asked for a JPEG file, so we're going to pick that one there. And I'm going to title this David's, if I can type properly, David's book cover. Okay, I've selected a JPEG file. You can pick where you want it to go, so I'll put it on my desktop there. Export, and then it will bring up this other menu asking you what quality do you want it to be. Sometimes you just want to do a quick pass through. You could show the preview of what you want it to look like. I'm going to do it to, I mean, 100's great, but sometimes that's too big depending on how many things you have going on in there. So like between, I'd say like 90 would probably be good, so maybe I'll reset it to 90, and then you just click export, and then it will show you, if we go down here to my desktop, David's book cover, there it is. My beautiful book cover that you're all gonna rush out and buy. Now you can see it's against a white background, so it doesn't show up great, but that's the basic idea. So now I've got a book cover, and then you would submit this file on Avidoo to Learn. So again, thanks for listening to all the different tutorials. I think I covered a lot of ground here. If you want more information, there's lots of tutorials on YouTube that you can watch. But yeah, you can always go back and watch all the rest of the parts of the video to help you get acquainted with GIMP. Again, thank you very much. This is David signing off for now. Bye.